Hi, welcome back to the Launchpad. My name is Matt Fitzgerald. I am the head of developer relations for Asia Pacific, China, and Japan. I am joined here with my lovely co-host, Alejandra.
Hi, everybody. I work in developer relations here at AWS too.
And these two fine gentlemen in the middle are here today to talk to us about the SageMaker Autopilot that was announced this morning. On my immediate left, we have Kumar, and next to him is Tom. How you doing, guys?
Good.
Hi.
Good. Glad to be here.
All right. So we've heard about Autopilot. For our audience, what are the top 3 customer takeaways? What are if you had 3 things you could tell a customer about this offering, what is it?
So I think what I would describe it as is not just Autopilot, but all of the SageMaker announcements today are intended to make it easier than ever to get started with machine learning. I think it makes machine learning much more demystified, much easier to get insights into the process of machine learning and to understand the models that get created, as well as make it easier to scale. So as you're going from single models to tens of models, as you get bigger and bigger, the problems that you have are much more sophisticated, and you need solutions that are much more tailored to machine learning in order to make it work effectively.
Fantastic. And we're talking about making ML more accessible.
Do you feel that
yeah.
this is a feature that could be used by just anyone, even someone who's not really familiar with machine learning? Is this something that anybody could pick up?
So I think that we've tried to design Autopilot so it's great for beginners. They can just come in and they can use Autopilot and they can get started and build models. But it's also going to take beginners on the voyage to be more expert because we expose what we did, we let people play with it, and we'll show you some of that in a minute. But it's also good for experts who want to get a quick start on understanding their data and understanding how different models are going to work. Replaces a ton of manual process that they do today. So we're excited for it for users all across the spectrum.
And to add to that, one of the customers that I worked with during the beta period, they actually thought of this as a way that they could give it to new people on the team so that they could get started with something that was very specific to their data and their use case, as opposed to going and searching through various internet sites and picking up pieces of code from different places. Instead, they can use Autopilot as a starting point on which they can innovate. Even more experienced data scientists have a baseline that is generated with Autopilot, and they can innovate off of that.
So there's a question that's come in from the chat, and that was about, does Autopilot help project or help us get some kind of understanding of how what it's going to cost us?
I guess as the product manager, I'll take that question. It's a similar pricing model to the old hyperparameter optimization service. It's built on top of the hyperparameter optimization capabilities that we have, and it is no additional charge over the SageMaker usage. So you use SageMaker processing jobs, you use SageMaker training jobs. It has compute and storage that is associated with, and those are the only costs that are associated with it.
Cool. So I know you guys have a demo here that we're going to look at shortly, but before we get into demo, are you able to give us a sneak peek of what's going on under the hood in terms of what Autopilot is doing, or is this the secret sauce?
So let's hang on until the demo. Part of the demo is going to be diving under the hood to talk about how
Fantastic. So we 2 in 1.
We show the users that on every run. So.
Fantastic. Okay, so the other thing, I don't know whether, Alejandra, did you have something immediate that you wanted to ask?
I know that I'm kind of curious to see what kind of people should be leveraging this.
I think our hope is that it's broadly useful for anyone who has tabular data. So things like lead scoring or churn modeling or anything like that. I mean, we tried to focus it on specific problems because the solutions that you would have for things like vision or language types of things, we know we have those covered in the other service offerings in AWS. So we wanted to focus on an area where we felt we could really make a difference.
And before we do get into the demo side of things, do you have any public referenceable use cases at the moment that
So I'm actually presenting later on in a breakout session with a customer of mine called Dev Factory, and Rahul, who's one of the leaders in that company, is looking to use that for these types of tabular data solutions, and he's found pretty good results with using SageMaker Autopilot.
Awesome. So I think a demo is something that's really going to give us an opportunity to see what's going on, and also hopefully a catalyst for some more questions, because I'm curious to see what happens here. So
Demo time?
Let's dive in.
yeah.
All right.
What you see in front of you is the new SageMaker Studio interface, built on top of Jupyter, but with lots of extra functionality. And so here you see a normal file browser, but if you go down to this interface, this is Experiment Manager. And when we work with Experiment Manager, we can now create a new experiment. And creating an experiment will take us to the Autopilot dashboard. So let's create a new experiment. We're at a Launchpad today, so let's call it Launchpad. And I have some data that I uploaded. It's a sort of a classic data set for scoring the lead generation in banking. I want to point it at a particular column in my tabular data. That's the number of people who said yes, they wanted to get a bank account and signed up for
just while you're doing that, on the data side of things, is it you have to have our data formatted in a certain way?
So we take data in CSV format,
Yep.
This will be an expanding set of data formats as we go forward.
Okay.
So today is day one for Autopilot. There's a lot of new features coming. Data formats will be among them,
Awesome.
and we're interested to hear what people want to do.
And we started out with CSV with headers because that's a pretty common database and spreadsheet format. People have tabular data in those formats, and we wanted to find something that was sort of very easy to see, access.
Because you see where I'm going. We launched the Redshift export today, right? Parquet would be super awesome.
Exactly. So,
Mm-hmm.
all of these things will be coming.
Yeah.
And so I can tell it what kind of machine learning problem to do, but it can also figure it out. It's going to notice that Y is a yes and no field, and it will do binary classification by itself, so I don't need to tell it. And yeah, I'm going to let it run the whole experiment. So now, once we've specified only that information, what's my data, and where do I want to store my results, I hit Create Experiment, and it goes. Now, we're going to do this a little bit like a cooking show. Kumar is now going to start taking it out of the oven, while the pre-baked version out of the oven while this one runs.
Yeah, so just for context, it probably takes somewhere between an hour and a couple of hours in order to run it. And there are parameters that you can specify in order to limit the amount of time. If you want results in an hour, you can limit it to that period of time, and it'll give you the best model that you found within an hour. So let me switch over to an experiment that we ran earlier.
So while it's doing that, what is happening under the hood there, Tom?
So what's happening is Autopilot is doing several different things, right? It's doing an analysis of your data. So it's looking at the tabular, it's figuring out which things are categorical fields, which things are numeric fields, which things are dates and times, other aspects about your data, and figuring that part out. And then it's figuring out which features might be interesting, and setting up a set of jobs. Typically we use 50, but you can adjust that, to compare both different algorithms and different hyperparameters with algorithms on those jobs.
So I actually clicked on one that was still in the process of running, but we can still see what's going on, and you can actually see that some of the jobs that are involved with hyperparameter tuning and training are in progress, and you can see those. Some of them are completed, and you can actually see the objective metric. In this particular case, it's accuracy is the objective metric, and if I sort by the objective metric, you can see some of the models that ended up showing up at the top of the list. So you see this sort of leaderboard. There's a model that was created a minute ago that is at the top of the leaderboard, and then there's various other sets of models that were being explored. So the other thing about this is, not only can you see all of the results that were generated as a part of this process, but you can also see some of the things that Autopilot understood about your data. So if I click on this Open Data Exploration notebook, you can see the things that Autopilot used in order to figure out what the right approach was. You can see, there are 36,000 rows, there are some columns, you know what the target column is named, and then you can see there are suggested action items as well. So the goal is to make it so that you have some insight into what Autopilot was able to understand as part of your data, and then potentially to understand problems that could have occurred during the derivation of that data set. So then you can debug this by going back and looking at the process by which you arrived at that data set. And data scientists know that this is one of the things that is very challenging as part of the process is your data has to be really clean, because otherwise your results will not be as accurate as you want them to be. So that's one aspect that we try and demystify. The second aspect that we try and demystify is that we provide the workflow as a Jupyter notebook as well. So there is this candidate generation notebook, and I'll open that up and hand it over to Tom to talk about that.
Okay, so now we've got this candidate definition notebook. This lets us investigate how the candidates were chosen, which algorithms we chose to use, everything else, but it also lets us change it. So what I have here is a read-only copy that was made automatically by the service, but now I can just hit import, and I get a copy in my own file system. If we went back to the file system view, we'd see it. And it's just a Jupyter notebook. Like any other Jupyter notebook, I can execute all the cells, I can modify cells. So let's scroll down here a little bit and look at some of the stuff we can modify. So here's a candidate selection. For example, when I'm running this, I might want to use a different kind of instance. So I'm going to change that to a C5 4x large instance, because maybe I know enough about my data and the algorithms I'm running. I could change the algorithms I'm running. This is using this particular candidate selection is a boosted tree candidate selection. So I can redefine all of these and just run them and we can run through the whole notebook, and then I can rerun the notebook as a new job. So this lets both beginners come in, they run a first job, then they can explore, right? And then for more advanced users, they may run the first job to get all the notebooks generated for their data, and then they come in and they just work with the notebooks from then on. Or they go back to Autopilot later to do other sorts of runs that will use different data. So here what we do is we give this opportunity for people to use all kinds of interactions with machine learning, from the very naive to the very sophisticated, and hopefully help people move from the beginning, from the naive, and give them the tools to become much more sophisticated and understand what's happening more.
I actually see a great question. How does this tie into source control? Well, one of the things that we've seen is that most AutoML solutions are pretty black box, which means you don't understand what's going on.
Yes.
What you can actually do with this is you can take this candidate generation notebook and you can check it into your source control system. This is an executable notebook, which means that not only can you say, I'm going to generate the candidates, and one of the options that Tom skipped over was generate the candidate definitions only. So you can generate that notebook only, choose not to execute any of the jobs, and you can check that into source control, and you can execute that notebook. So you not only have it in source control, you have the traceability that this is exactly what I ran, and you can understand that whole thing, and you can modify it, and you can derive from it. But you also, in regulated industries or any case where you need it for audit purposes, you can also save that notebook. That is an artifact that you can use in order to understand and trace the way that you went through to generate these automatically generated models,
And one of the ways, this is all built on a Jupyter base, and one of the ways AWS and our team in particular has been working with the Jupyter community is to improve the Git integration. So you see, we've been contributing to, and this one isn't yet in Git, and we're not going to do it right here, but we have the ability to go look at our relationship to a Git repository, do diffs with the latest checked-in version of Git. So as you generate new candidates, you can just drop them in over the old candidates and see what the differences are with these Git tools in Jupyter.
So this is awesome. I love it where the guests pretty much drive the entire session. But this is actually really cool stuff. Alejandro, is this something you're going to start to look at? Because I don't know about you, when I was looking at the IDE here, the notebook style interface, there's a lot of guidance in there as well. So
pretty useful.
I'm not going to profess to be a machine learning expert by any stretch, but I'm certainly going to take a look at this.
And the hope is that we can provide the right capabilities for people to learn more about machine learning. We don't think it should be this black box art. I mean, there are certainly things that are very difficult problems that you need skilled practitioners in order to solve. So we create these capabilities like debugger and model monitor that are very useful for skilled practitioners, but we want it to be as widespread as possible.
So when you're thinking about making this easier for anyone to pick up, what documentation links or where would you point new customers that are not used to ML yet? Where would they get started?
I mean, I actually think Autopilot is a really good place to get started because it generates these things for you, which means that you have a starting point. It's commented code so you can understand exactly what it's doing. There are certainly the AWS documentation is another place where we try to explain the examples. We also, within SageMaker notebooks, we have something on the order of 350 different examples of various machine learning problems where we have commented notebooks that you can use as a baseline to solve it. We won't claim to solve every machine learning problem. The machine learning space is very vast, and there are things that are specific to particular customer problems, but we want as many examples as is possible so that people don't feel like they're starting from nothing. I mean, a blank page is really hard to start with.
Well, you mentioned over 300 examples. That sounds like a pretty good starting place.
Yep,
I hope
a lot
so.
here.
I hope so.
I do want to go back to the first stage of your demo where you effectively ingested the data. And now this seems really interesting for people who are not in the ML space as well, like anyone who looks after data warehouses and needs to somehow clean data. Is this something that we can sort of stop the stage there and then use that data even if we didn't want to do ML on it further down? Like maybe we wanted to clean it and upload it into another data store? Do you see it as being used like that?
It could be. It could be. So we also store the pre-processed data sets.
Yep.
So not only does it go through and analyze the data, but it runs a set of preprocessors, and those preprocessed data sets are also available, just like everything else, in the customer's account in S3, because we want to make sure that the customer has not only insight into everything, but control over all of this information as well.
And which leads me to another question, do we think that at some point we're going to be able to do some kind of quality control at the ingestion of the data? So we can say X records we're going to take and see whether they conform to some acceptable standard.
That's something we've been working on.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
we have to see where that goes.
Yeah, I would say stay tuned.
Yeah.
This is definitely an active area that we're trying to understand how we can get better at all of these things.
Awesome. Well, super impressed, guys, and congratulations on the launch.
Thank
Any
you.
closing
Thank you.
words, Alejandro?
Thank you for coming.
Awesome.
Thank
Thanks
you.
very much, guys, and
Thanks.
we'll be back later.